Deputy O'Reilly.
I move.
You move. Do you want to address the amendment?
Subsection 1, Subsection 1 is a prohibition on the advertising of alcohol online unless all reasonable steps are taken to ensure that children cannot view the advertising. All reasonable steps is a formula widely used in the statute book. It is the same test used by the Department of Health in relation to the offence of selling tobacco products to under 16s. The reference to information society services reflects the EU terminology used to define services such as websites, email, search engines, Twitter, YouTube, etc., and it is the terminology used by the Department of Health in their ban on e-cigarettes. Section 6, subsection 2 then sets out factors to be taken into account in determining whether reasonable steps to ensure advertising cannot be viewed by children. The reference to the court or jury reflects the fact that the offence could be tried on indictment before a jury. The subsection is not prescriptive as to what constitutes all reasonable steps, but I would expect that it would effectively require the following: age gates, which would be at least a user entered date of birth or similar. The use of any demographic targeting tools provided by advertising networks to limit viewing to users over 18. Registration of websites with internet filtering software providers and a restriction on retweets sent by email and similar tools where these would have the effect of exposing an advertisement to a new audience which could potentially include children. The reference to state of technological development is borrowed from the Data Protection Acts 1988 and 2003, and it is intended to have the effect that the duty to prevent viewing by children will become more stringent as time progresses and access controls become more effective. Subsection 3 provides that the offence only apply to audiovisual media services originating in Ireland. This is done to reflect the country of origin principle in the AVMSD, which prevents Ireland from imposing these rules on services originating in other EEA jurisdictions. I had expected that the Department of Health would table its own amendment in similar terms, but alas, this did not happen.
Deputy O'Reilly, are there any other members offering at this stage on this? Deputy Donnelly? My apologies. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to support the spirit of what Deputy O'Reilly is trying to do. I've discussed it with the Minister in some detail, and it has been explained that for a bunch of what sound like very reasonable and material legal reasons, it can't be done in this way. However, I think the point raised is incredibly important, because one of the things that this bill does is try and prevent advertising of alcohol around areas like sports, and particularly as it relates to children. And of course, as we know, advertising is moving online. So my understanding is that over 50% of advertising revenue spent in Ireland today is online, and so I think we are going to great efforts in making a real difference in terms of advertising, billboards and near schools and so forth. But to miss online advertising, of course, is a real problem. Now, my understanding is it couldn't be brought through this bill because it requires changes to European legislation and so forth. And so while we won't be supporting the exact motion, I wholeheartedly agree with the point Deputy O'Reilly raises, which is whatever prohibitions we're bringing in, whatever protections we're bringing in, particularly for younger people and children, we must, as a matter of urgency, figure out how to bring that into the online space as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other deputy? No. Minister.
Thank you very much, Cian Corla. So opposition amendments 1, 2, 3, 6 and 24, as Deputy O'Reilly outlined, to create a framework for age restrictions for alcohol advertising on the internet. And I too, like Deputy Donnelly, want to be very clear that I fully support the intention of these amendments, as I've discussed with Deputy O'Reilly, as I also discussed in the Shannon, and as my colleague Minister Byrne would have discussed at committee stage. Because one of the primary objectives of this bill is to delay the initiation of alcohol consumption by children and young people. So, to be very clear, there's no disagreement between myself and Deputy O'Reilly on the intent of what the Deputy is trying to achieve. These amendments propose the creation of an offence if a person advertises or causes to be advertised an alcohol product on an information society service, unless all reasonable steps are taken to ensure that the advertisement cannot be viewed by children. An example of what constitutes a reasonable step is whether age verification controls have been used to prevent prevent access by children to an advertisement. My concern, which won't be of any news to the Deputy, with this approach is that these amendments use the framework of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which is obviously within the remit of my colleague, the Minister for Communications, Climate Action and the Environment. My officials have previously consulted with that department and the Department of Justice and Equality on this matter, because the issue is an important one. I'm informed that the Audiovisual Media Services Directive is a sector-specific directive for television and services that are like television, and I'm informed that the intention of its scope, as would be done by these amendments, to include any audiovisual content on any internet platform would cut across several EU directives and other legislation. In addition to these legal concerns, there is a difficulty with enforcement of the proposal. For example, if it was introduced for websites hosted in Ireland, advertisers could simply move to websites which are not hosted in Ireland in order to avoid the necessity to comply with these proposed restrictions. Finally, and this is just a practical point, but I'm unclear as to how effective age verification controls anyway are in terms of their implementation. If it's a matter of clicking a button to confirm that the viewer is aged 18 or over, children may simply well be able to click that button and therefore access the alcohol advertising. So, Cian Corla, I fully support the intention here. I'm very willing to work with colleagues across this House and indeed with other colleagues in government to see how Ireland can endeavour to address this and also endeavour to play a role in Europe in terms of addressing it. But it is the view and advice available to me that European legislation is likely to be necessary to address issues in relation to online platforms due to the cross-border nature of the services involved. That's not to say we shouldn't do it, but that this vehicle is not the best place or a position where we can do it, that this issue needs to be addressed at EU level, and for that reason I do not propose to accept these amendments.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Reilly, do you want to come back on that?
Well, the information I have directly contradicts the information that the Minister has just given, and while I fully appreciate that the Deputies respect the intention, it is and it remains our position that this is the correct vehicle in which to do it, because we believe that we have to take all and any steps that are necessary.
Healy-Rae wanted to comment on this matter.
First of all, thank you very much, Cian Corla. I suppose basically I am opposed to the cancer warning on this one. I thought he said one. Amendment 1 to 3.
1 to 3 inclusive, and 6 and 24.
Well, I suppose maybe I don't know. And does this include advertising? This what, Minister?
Internet advertising targeting children. Are you for it or against it, Deputy?
And is it cancer warning in pubs and restaurants?
No, that's not the subject matter here.
No.
So we'll come back to you when we get to that particular matter.
All right.